Good morning, everyone. Today we are continuing our sermon series called Own It. One of the things that we do here at Connect Church, as many of you know, is that every fall we take a little bit of time and we talk about the gifts that God has given to us, and then we try to identify those gifts and then use those gifts in service to God and His kingdom. This is one of the really, really important parts of being a follower of Jesus Christ, which is why we try to talk about it every year. But it's this idea of identifying that I am given things by God, and I am called by God to use those things to make the world better, right? God didn't just give us stuff so that we could just feel good about ourselves. God gave us these things, these gifts, whether they be financial gifts or talents or abilities or skills or spiritual gifts. God gave us this stuff so that we could take the things that God gave us and use them, right, to help, to do good, to make the world better, to serve God. This is why God gives us stuff. So in the spirit of that, we're talking about Matthew 25. I'm not going to read the whole story today because I read it all last week, but you know what it is. It's Matthew 25. It's the parable of the talents. And the story goes like this. Jesus tells the story of a parable where a master has 3 servants. He's going out of town. He gives each of his servants a different amount of money, right? Various quantities of money. To one he gives 10, to one he gives 5, to one he gives 3, or whatever the numbers are. He gives them a different amount. So then he heads out of town. He comes back. The one who he gave a great deal to multiplied them. The one that he gave a medium amount to multiplied them. The third servant, however, was afraid. He was afraid to lose what his master had given to him, and so he buried it. And when he got back, his servant had not invested it, had not duplicated, had not done anything with the gift that he had been given. And so his master rebukes him. He says, you wicked and unfaithful servant, you have not done the thing that I asked you to do. At least you could have put it in the bank and gathered interest. And so he took the talent, and talent is a quantity of money, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks. He took the talent from the servant which he'd given to the least and gave it to one of the others. And the point of this story, the big point, is that you and I, each and every one of us, are given these gifts by God, and we are called by God to use these things. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things. Today, the big thing that we're going to talk about, which Jason kind of hit on a little bit, is we are going to talk about accountability, okay? Now, accountability is kind of a scary word, but it's also an important one because, frankly, it's the truth. The matter is that each one of us are accountable for the responsibility that God gives to each of us. The third of the servants represents those of us who are more concerned about keeping what we have for ourselves. We are more concerned about our own security and our own prosperity and our own self than we are about the world, right? Because the servant is right. He should be afraid. Because if he was to take that talent and risk it and lose it, his master would be upset. But and remember, it's a parable, right? This is to teach us a lesson. The point is that he was more worried about being rebuked or taking a risk to himself than he was about serving his master. Now, you and I are called by God, once again, to do things to make the world better. And one of the big mistakes that we make is a complete misunderstanding of who God is we believe that God exists to take care of us. Now, God certainly does take care of us, right? He cares what happens to us. He loves us. All that sort of thing is true. But God does not exist to take care of us. That's not the way that it works. God created us to serve Him and one another. That's why we exist. And so when we speak to God and we ask God for things and serve God, when you become a disciple at a certain level of maturity, the calling that we have and our primary focus is to make sure that we are serving God and not ourselves, that we are serving others and not ourselves. Make sense? And so when God gives you something, responsibility, whether that be a simple thing as, you get a job, you get a paycheck, you're now responsible for that amount of money, right? You're responsible for it. You have to do something with it according to what God does. If you've got a home or a car or shoes on your feet, anything that you own, you're responsible for. And then there's more serious things like our relationships. If God blesses you with a child, you're responsible for that kid not dying, right? At least until they're 18, right? If God gives you a marriage or a friendship or a mission, whatever it is that God gives you, once God gives you that, remember everything belongs to God ultimately, once God gives you that, you then become responsible for it. And you are a steward of that thing. And once you become a steward of that thing, God holds you accountable for the things that you do with that stuff. Okay? God has expectations for the way in which you treat it. So, theologically, we are here to serve God, and God holds us accountable for the way in which we use the things that God gives us. So, God holds each of us responsible for our own actions. This is another way to say it, that we are each responsible for our own actions. This is from Ezekiel. It says this: "The one who sins is the one who will die. The child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. The righteous of the child will be credited to them, and the wickedness will be charged against them." Okay? So, once again, we are accountable to God for the way in which we use the stuff that we're responsible for. And a part of the thing that we're responsible for is just our life. Now, this is a scary and encouraging topic for me, okay? Because it teaches us that no one else is responsible for my actions but me, okay? Now certainly it's true that circumstances can drive us to certain things, right? If I'm afraid or I'm frustrated or I'm angry or I've been hurt or I'm scared or if I'm short on cash or I'm abundant in cash, that can drive me to do certain things, right? And God certainly has understanding for that. It's something that I do out of fear or frustration. God gets that stuff. But ultimately, I am responsible for the things that I do and say, right? They're mine to be responsible for. Now, this is good and bad. This is scary and also liberating, because it's liberating because if something happens to me, someone does something to me or hurts me in some way, or I get laid off, or I'm short on cash, or if something happens to me, it's liberating to know that no matter what happens to me, I don't have to do anything that is contrary to my values. I don't have to do something that is sinful. I don't have to, right? No matter how scared I am or frustrated I am, and I know you can think of extreme circumstances like what if, I get that, but usually, regular life, right? If I'm scared or frustrated or angry or whatever, I don't have to sin in that, right? I don't have to. If someone hurts me, I don't have to get revenge. If I'm afraid, I don't have to lash out in anger. If I'm frustrated, I don't have to do something stupid. I don't have to, right? I'm free of that. Now, the other end of it is that when I do something dumb, guess whose fault it is? Yeah. And I have a long, various track record of dumb stuff, right? And every dumb decision I've ever made was mine. Every sin that I've committed because I chose to. And sometimes maybe they'd be understandable, right? I mean, we're all human beings, and we all get in extreme situations, and we get frustrated or scared or whatever, and we may do things that are wrong or sinful, and as a human being, you may be able to understand that, and I may be able to justify it, but ultimately, it's not right. And I'm responsible for the things that I do, and so even though I can justify it in my own head, it doesn't mean it's justified, right? And so as we talk about owning it, okay, the reality is that you and I are, in fact, whether we like it or not, responsible for the stuff in our lives. We are responsible for our own actions, our own thoughts, the way that we are stewards over our stuff. And because we are responsible for those things, it makes us free, and it also makes us accountable to the things that we have.